Terminator Zero is an upcoming Netflix anime that is scheduled to premiere on August 29th. It took me a bit, but I saw what they did there. I kid you not, you guys. It did not fully enter into my brain the significance of that date until after I had started watching this show. Maybe I was like an episode or two in, and finally it just dawned on me, oh my gosh, that's hilarious that they're releasing this on August 29th. Well, one of the things that made it click for me was that there are multiple references to August 29th, 1997. This particular animation, I guess it's like a collab between Japan and the US because there's multiple people working on it. The original language that this was recorded in is Japanese. Obviously, yes, you can change it to English. Timothy Olyphant is one of the characters. He voices one of the Terminators that is prominent in the series. And I think also Rosario Dawson is in there. So I didn't realize that this was primarily a Japanese production. I thought it was just, something from the US, like Castlevania or something like that. But anyway, whatever. Doesn't matter. I was definitely interested to watch this. I begged Netflix to please let me have a screener because at the time this goes live, I will be away at DragonCon. I want to have time to watch it and be able to get a review filmed and edited and ready to go for release on August 29th when the review embargo lifts. The premise of this is it takes place in two separate time periods, 2022 and 1997. And there is a rebellion fighter, whatever, resistance fighter that is sent back in time with a specific mission pertaining to a scientist guy, tech guy, whatever, in 1997 Japan. And also a Terminator has been sent back, as is pretty typical with a lot of these iterations of the story. There were many things I enjoyed about this. I can't really pinpoint actively anything that was a significant detriment for me. There were a couple of questions I had about things that were happening, but certainly nothing that was enough to drag this down. For sci-fi stuff, and comparing it to something that I recently saw that's sci-fi/horror related, Alien Romulus, I enjoyed Terminator Zero much more. I do admit to having bias because Terminator is one of my favorite franchises. The Terminator and Terminator 2, fantastic films. Terminator 2 is my favorite movie of all time. So I definitely went into this with a pretty high expectation that I was going to enjoy it. I didn't enjoy it as much as the Sarah Connor Chronicles, and I don't know if that was primarily because this isn't really about Sarah Connor or John Connor. It's completely new characters. There's definitely references to the original timeline that we know of, August 29th, 1997, when Judgment Day happens. And in this particular storyline, nothing has really been altered. Judgment Day is still going to happen. And so I found that kind of interesting. I do like that they have callbacks to the first Terminator without it feeling like it was a forced type of thing, in contrast to Alien Romulus with their different callbacks that felt very shoehorned in and just clunky and did not work for me. I also liked that they tried some new stuff with this. Like, it wasn't the same story of Sarah rehashed in whatever ways that it could be rehashed. This was a story about completely different people that were connected to the events of Judgment Day and the Terminators and Skynet and all that stuff. And something else that I appreciated about it was it delved a bit more into the philosophical type discussions about AI and humans and why an AI like Skynet would decide to do what it did. Also, discussions about time travel and what it really means. When you time travel, time is not necessarily linear. When someone goes back in time, they're creating a whole new timeline. These were things that weren't really explored super in depth in the previous movies. Probably the closest they came was maybe Terminator Genesis, unless I'm forgetting some elements of other stories. I try to completely block Dark Fate from my memory. But for purposes of this particular series, I'm going to probably mainly touch on things like the Terminator and Terminator 2. They don't really go into the in-depth, detailed discussion about what these time travel incidents mean and what they didn't realize at the time, that they were sending these different people and machines back to try to fix what they thought could be fixed, and all they were really doing is just creating a new timeline and all that sort of stuff. It was interesting. There were multiple scenes where it is showing this scientist tech guy having a conversation with an AI, and that goes on throughout the bulk of the show. A lot of it takes place between them just talking. Then there's this other part of the story where it's showing the fighter from the future and the Terminator from the future and the different missions that they have and the encounters that they have. There's also stuff going on with Malcolm's children. I'm sorry, did I say the scientist guy's name? Malcolm is his name. His children, and they get caught up in stuff, and then things slowly build to this final climax that happens at the end. It's 8 episodes long, about 30 minutes per episode, so it will take you about 4 hours or slightly less to watch it all. It was a quick watch, obviously for me, because I just went right through it pretty quickly. You know, it's Terminator stuff after all. And as I've already touched on, I liked that they delved into different topics, like a different AI that's involved and the ramifications of that. And it got a little bit muddy and confusing towards the end when the Terminator started to do stuff that didn't make much sense to me. They do sort of clarify that later on, and the clarification, yes, that makes sense, but the character that this clarification revolves around, I don't feel like this particular person had a convincing character arc that helped make this stuff makes sense. I mean, it made sense, but what I mean is I couldn't really buy into it because I didn't feel like they'd done a good enough job really fully developing this particular character. I'm keeping it vague because I don't want to really spoil the details of the plot as far as that goes, but there's definitely some twisty stuff that happens that I thought was really interesting. I liked that. I also liked that there's the continuing discussion in here about things like fate and trying to change the path that fate has set and that you are in charge of your own fate. Now, that stuff was definitely talked about in Terminator and Terminator 2. With regard to today, these times, it felt like the issues that were being discussed in this show were relevant to right now, giving the expansive growth of AI in our society. I found all that really interesting. I was fully engaged with this story. I'm going to avoid other things that I had written down just because I don't want it to be too spoilery, but I will touch on one other thing that I had a little tiny question about or issue, like I didn't really understand. There's a scene where, and I will keep it vague, there's a scene where robots don't behave in a way that they had been behaving just before this particular moment, and it didn't make sense to me because there was nothing different about this situation than there had been about the other previous situation that was going on where they had reacted differently. Maybe I just kind of missed something in the moment. Perhaps a rewatch will clarify that. These issues that I wrote down are very minor. It did not really detract at all from my enjoyment of this series. I think if you're a fan of the Terminator franchise, a sci-fi time travel type stuff, you'll probably enjoy this. Even though it's only 8 episodes long, it's not super action-packed. There definitely are moments of action that happen within each episode, but it's not really something, honestly, it felt like the bulk of this, or a good portion of this, was taken up with these discussions between Malcolm and the AI, and then finding out what's going on, you know, with Malcolm and his backstory, and also his kids, and this resistance fighter that was sent back. So some people might feel like it moves a little slow, but it didn't really bother me. I'm obviously fully admitting to my bias in favor of Terminator stuff. I will say that I was much more pleased watching something like this than I was when I watched Dark Fate, which to me was a complete disaster, a totally wasted opportunity that still makes me angry to think about it. I don't feel that way when I think about this show. By the time it was done, I was satisfied, and I liked the different issues and topics that were touched on throughout the course of the story. It, really made you think. And yeah, I like the different callbacks to the previous movies, especially the very first episode. It kind of starts off with like a horror movie. There's a bunch of dead bodies and this Terminator's going through the area and this person's trying to escape them. So that definitely reminded me of certain elements of the Terminator, which feels much more like a horror story than Terminator 2, which feels more like a sci-fi action type of story. I will say that, tying back to what I was mentioning about maybe some people finding it kind of slow, for me, it wasn't until the end of the 4th episode that I really started to get emotionally attached to what was happening. And I think a lot of that was because there was an event that occurred that I was like, oh, okay, so they're really going to go there. And then in the 5th episode, more and more stuff was unfolding. And by that point, I was fully invested in watching to the end to see what was going to happen with these characters. Something that I almost forgot to mention was the score. There are little tiny slivers of the scores from the first 2 movies, but the show also has its own score, which I enjoyed. It felt almost haunting in a way. And I think you'll know what I mean when you get around to watching this. So yeah, I guess that's about the most I can say about Terminator Zero. If you guys check it out, I would like to know what your experience is. Like I said, I am going into this with a definite bias in favor of it just because of my love of the franchise. I've been very open about the films that I enjoyed and didn't enjoy. Probably the worst one for me is Dark Fate, just because of how that one just missed the mark so bigly. Anyway, okay, enough rambling. I'm going to wrap this up, and I will see you guys in the next video. Adios.